Good. So let me start with a brief introduction in case some of you do not know me. So my name is Oleg. I'm the co-founder of ToughBite, and we are a tech recruitment agency. And we have also built our own tech recruitment platform with a team of as many as 10 developers. So we've been around for about 8 years now, and we've our recruitment team has grown to over 20 recruiters, and we've closed over 700 positions. So we have a lot of data that we analyze regularly to improve our own performance. I would go as far as saying that recruitment data and analytics are at the core of what we do. Also worth adding that we are launching something new in addition to our platform, but I'll sort of announce it at the end of this webinar to sort of create a bit of suspense and keep you on the edge of your seats. We primarily hire for tech roles, but for our clients, but we've also hired for various other roles. And this webinar will be aimed at companies that are hiring for themselves rather than at agencies that they're looking to hire for others. That being said, some of the basics apply to agencies as well. So let's quickly go through the agenda. I wanted to maybe apologize in advance. I realized that my slides were looking a little bit boring and just full of text. So in order to spice things up and make things interesting, I added some AI generated images, which look to be pretty terrible, to be frank, but hopefully they'll kind of keep you awake and entertained throughout this webinar. Now, the topics we'll cover are why should you measure things in the first place? So why do you need recruitment analytics? What it is that you should be measuring, or what it is that other people are commonly measuring. Then the last topic will be how to actually measure them and how do companies typically measure things. Now, let's maybe start with why you should be measuring things. It's maybe not such an obvious answer. A lot of companies we talk to sort of know that they should be more data-driven in their recruitment efforts, that they should be collecting more data, that they should be better at how they handle that data and use that to drive their decisions. But surprisingly few companies actually do it. And I think a big part of it is that recruiters, and HRs that want to be data-driven, maybe are not able to convince the hiring managers and upper management as to the benefits of sort of investing resources in setting up those processes of collecting the data and so on. So the reasons in no particular order, and obviously this isn't an exhaustive list, are that by measuring what you do and collecting data, you will improve your decision-making processes. I mean, recruiting by its nature can be very subjective. You can just click with a candidate, or you can kind of have a gut feeling in an instinct for them being a good fit, right? Or you can find some positions more daunting or somehow frustrating to work on compared to others. And because of this, I think it's very easy to have to be very subjective in your decision making. I mean, even with us, even with all the data that we collect, there are certain clients and positions that we keep working on because we feel like we will close them. We're like working with the client and so on. But then when we look at the numbers, it turns out that actually, we're wasting maybe time and really something needs to change in order for us to close the position and make any money on that hire or on that role. Now, so then once you have the data and you're able to do better decisions, what you can then do is you can start optimizing your processes. And obviously the reason to optimize might be to reduce costs. That's typically what management is interested in, but there might be other reasons for wanting to optimize things as well. So you may want to, for example, just reduce the number of steps and simplify things because you feel that things are too complicated. And another thing you may want to do, and this is obviously like being a hot topic, is reduce bias. As companies become more international and multicultural, bias comes into play, and by collecting data, analyzing the performance of candidates of different backgrounds, or somehow not screening out candidates that sort of fit a certain profile early on in the process, you can actively work to reduce hiring bias. And then kind of, if you look at it from the candidates side of things, like a very good indicator of candidates' performance and retention and so on is the candidate experience. And actually, what we often see is that companies sort of assume that candidates are sort of that it's a kind of a one-way process, that the candidates apply, that they have something to offer them, and if it doesn't work out with the candidate, then they just move on to the next applicant until they finally make a hire. But by improving the candidate experience, not only of those candidates that are eventually hired, but also of those that are not hired, not only are you sort of improving your employer brand and increasing the chances of them referring you to their friend or colleague and doing more placements, but you're also sort of able to find out very key insights about what works and what does not work in your process. At ToughBite, we introduced sort of candidate experience surveys a few years ago, and we've gone through a couple of iterations on how this works. And I would say it's been one of the sort of most valuable things that we introduced early on to our platform. In addition to sort of quantified numbers like a rating, an NPS score that you can get from a candidate on their experience, you can also collect a lot of qualitative information on specific issues with the process, things you've overlooked, or just kind of random mistakes that maybe a recruiter has made when communicating with a candidate that are very good to sort of pick up on and address early on rather than just letting them rest. And finally, and maybe most importantly, is that with all the changes to automate, with automation of recruitment and so on, if you go to any conferences, you'll hear that there's a lot of talk about the need for recruiters to take on a more strategic role within the organization. So rather than just sort of taking in the requests from the hiring managers and working to fill those roles, the idea is that recruiters should take on more ownership of the hiring processes and strategy as a whole, maybe anticipate the workload and act more as an advisor to hiring managers and top management at the company. Now, it's very hard to do this when you do not have any facts to back up your advice. Whereas if you do have the facts and the hard cold data, it is much easier to make a case. It is much easier to set the correct expectations and generally sort of anticipate in any changes or upcoming trends and play a proactive role instead of a reactive role in your organization when it comes to hiring. Then the next question is, what should you be measuring, right? And usually this is all fairly overwhelming. Once you start sort of doing research on the topic, you get sort of given a whole number of terms that seem very sophisticated, all sorts of acronyms and things that somehow are all related to one another. My advice would be to try and try and simplify things as much as possible, and sort of start something simple, relatively high level, and then kind of build on that rather than trying to come up with an ideal sort of a recruitment analytics strategy from the get-go. That being said, there are certain recruitment metrics that are sort of easier to measure and more commonly used than others. And in a way, the other metrics sort of feed into them, and they'll only become relevant once you start drilling down. So what I've done is I've condensed this down to like what I believe are the things, the metrics to start with, So I'll walk you through those right now, and then kind of provide some other examples as well at the end of this section. So, in order of priority, these are time to fill, cost per hire, and retention rate. So let's start with time to fill. So what time to fill is the duration between when a job is posted and an offer is accepted. Now, this is something that's quite easy to measure. Like even if you don't have an applicant tracking system, you can create a spreadsheet or even like use pen and paper, and make a note of when you started hiring for the role, i.e. the job was search was kicked off, to when an offer was accepted, right? And if you do this for all your positions, you'll quickly see that some positions are much easier to fill, others are take longer. There might be differences between hiring managers. There might be differences between departments or types of roles. There might be differences from one recruiter to another. And then you can start making sort of educated guesses as to the reason for that. Maybe some position has too low of a salary range. Maybe another position has too many steps in the interviewing process, and so on and so forth. But once you start digging in deeper, then there's other metrics that you can kind of look at that might give you a hint as to what you need to improve. So some of these are time to hire. So whereas time to fill is the time it takes for you to close the position or have an offer accepted. And this applies to the position as a whole and works across all the candidates that you're interviewing. Time to hire applies to a single candidate. So the candidate that applied and then was eventually hired, how long did that process take? And at Tough Bite, we've been constantly telling our clients, especially the smaller startups, that this is your main competitive advantage when hiring people, because from a candidate's point of view, a process that takes longer is a process that's less likely to succeed. So it's better for them to accept something that a concrete offer they have on the table than wait forever to go through a process where they might end up being dropped, right? So also a faster time to hire results in a better candidate experience. The candidate feels like this is a company that's sort of not stagnated, that's agile, and so on and so forth. So they're much more motivated than going in to the job. Now, the next one is source of hire. So here, you can start looking at different ways in which you source candidates for the position. So maybe the candidates coming through your career site that are applying aren't so good, whereas candidates you're getting from an agency are much better, and go through the process faster. Maybe certain job boards work better than others, and so on. And again, by looking at these, you can drop the sources that are not effective, that maybe are actually creating an extra workload on your team and hence slowing down the recruitment process, and focus on those that do bring the results. And the final one I've listed here, because this is something that, again, we find very important, is the offer acceptance rate. So even though you've made an offer, it's not always accepted. And if you think about it, you look at the whole sort of recruitment funnel, there's very many stages up to that point. And each of those stages, there's like a high percentage probability of the candidate not making it to the next one. But the candidates that do make it to the offer stage, and as a result of that, the candidates that make it to the last stage, to the offered stage, are extremely valuable, because to get another candidate at the same stage, you need to invest a whole lot of time and effort. So anything you do to improve the offer acceptance rate has like a massive impact on time to fill, on the cost of hiring, and so on. And then sometimes it's very simple things that you can do there. So, for example, rather than making a blind offer to a candidate, just saying, this is what we're going to offer you, take it or leave it. You can sort of adjust the process so that before you make an offer, you sort of have a recruiter, or maybe an in-house recruiter or an external recruiter, if one is available, ask the candidate that if we were to make you such and such offer, would you accept, or would there be some things that you'd be concerned about? And the candidate will likely say that, yeah, I will accept if this and that minor thing are addressed somehow. And those are typically things that you can easily include in the offer that you may have overlooked otherwise, and that can have a massive impact on the offer acceptance rate. There's also like a psychological effect, because the candidate has effectively said that they're committed to accepting the offer if their conditions are met. Right. The next one is cost per hire, and these are the total expenses incurred in the recruitment process divided by the number of hires. That's an important distinction in that, again, hiring recruitment is an unpredictable process, and there's a lot of averages. So if you make a lot of placements, then the numbers average out. But if you only look at a single placement, then it's really not enough statistically significant data for you to make any sort of judgments based on. So if you look at the work that we do at TovBite, we've had placements that we've closed in a week, and we've had positions that have taken us 8 months to close. And if you analyze either of those extremes, you're really not going to get much. But if you start looking at the average numbers, then all of a sudden, you're able to kind of make certain inferences and start to improve processes and so on. That being said, the cost per hire is very difficult to measure accurately, and I would actually say that the time to fill is a good proxy for cost per hire, because the longer the process takes, the more work that you and your colleagues need to do, the more time you need to spend interviewing, the more money you need to spend on ads, and so on and so forth. So if you're not able to sort of calculate cost per hire to sort of a satisfactory degree, then I suggest to maybe just leave it for later and focus on the time to fill instead. But other factors play into this. So a source of hire can make a difference. So you could, for example, just accept candidates through your own career site, or you could post a paid job ad, or you can work with an agency. And depending on the role and its difficulty and so on, different sources might make more sense. And the cost per hire can actually be very different from one type of role to another. And finally, I thought I would mention retention rate. The retention rate is the percentage of hires who remain over a specific period. And typically you're looking at the trial or probation period after the candidate starts. So how many sort of candidates that you end up hiring actually stick with you afterwards, or you want to stay with you afterwards? Now, again, this is an easy thing to measure, and it's an important thing to measure, because I feel that the job of the recruiter, and even an external partner such as ourselves, is not to just place someone with a company so that they start working there no matter what. We actually want to make sure that they stick with the company longer term. That's how we create value, and that's really sort of what's sort of expected of us. In fact, we provide a warranty, and a free replacement in case the candidate does not stay with the company. So, there's kind of a financial incentive on our part to make sure that the retention rate is high. Now, this is a general thing that if you look at any one number, it will sort of link to some other numbers, and you need to look like beyond just those stages in the funnel. You sort of need to look a bit further ahead to try and see whether you're doing sort of unnecessary optimization at the expense of something else further down the line. But the metrics that feed into this are the quality of hire. So this is essentially something that can be measured with like surveys, like sent to managers of the candidates, and how satisfied they are with their performance. This can also be sort of impacted by time to productivity. So after you've hired someone, how quickly you're at onboarding them and making sure that they're producing valuable results rather than taking up time of their colleagues, and requiring training and so on. And other things that may impact it, and I'm just throwing things out there, but is, for example, the referral hiring rate. So if you're getting a lot of hires through referrals from your own employees, the person you will place will be working with friends and people they know. So they likely will know more about the company going in, and they will also be less likely to leave because they will not want to disappoint their friends after joining. Then there's a bunch of other things you can measure, and I'm not going to list them all. But some examples are candidate experience that I mentioned earlier. Then there is sort of the opposite of that, which is the hiring manager experience. So if you look at the role of a recruiter, in a way, your customer is the hiring manager. So what you want to do is make sure that they're satisfied, that you're on the same page with them, and so on. And then candidate diversity is another thing that is becoming increasingly important, and there are things that you can measure and so on. But around that, but these are more qualitative things. So, like I mentioned earlier, you can collect like an NPS score from the hiring manager and say, how happy are you with the results of this recruitment that I've done for you? And you'll get like a number between, some average between 1 and 10, across different hiring manager people involved in the process. But you should also, in such cases, ask them for open-ended feedback and just to say, why is it that you gave this number? And then when you look at the outliers, so the numbers that are extremely high or extremely low, you'll see like which of the things that you're doing well that you should be doing more of, and which of the things that you're not doing well that you should fix in your work and in your processes. All right. So then the next topic is how should you measure? So there's kind of certain prerequisites that you need to keep in mind. Then there is certain key data that you need to make sure you're reporting, or your tool, your applicant tracking system is reporting. Then I'll briefly go over the different tools used for measuring and collecting the data. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about analysis, and then we'll wrap up with that. So the prerequisites, before you start kind of analyzing data, what you need to make sure is that you're actually recording the data. So oftentimes, you want to analyze something, but you realize you actually never recorded that data in the first place. Now, it's not worth recording stuff just for the sake of it. I mean, there's all sorts of GDPR reasons and kind of just technical difficulties involved. But there's some basic things that you do want to track, and these are interactions that you and your team members have with the candidates and the positions that you're working on. You want to educate your team members to enter the data as soon as possible. So ideally, it's part of their workflow. For example, if they have interviewed a candidate, they should, enter their interview notes right afterwards and provide their rating afterwards. If they've reached out to a candidate, they should move them to the next stage in the position pipeline right away. They should not wait until the end of the day or the next day to do it, because they'll likely forget. And then you likely need to have some processes to make sure that this is actually being done consistently. This is more of a culture thing than anything else. It's easy to kind of like overlook these things, but if you build that in from the get-go, then generally it'll become easy, and it won't become a problem for people to follow these rules. And then the next thing to do is to make sure that the data you're recording is consistent. And I provided a couple of examples. So, for example, it's easy to have a stage named, interested in the pipeline. So yes, we reached out to the candidate and they are interested. But what does that actually mean? Does interested mean that they didn't say go away when you contacted them? Or does it mean that they're ready to talk to you? So it's important to have something like more like an event and a factual thing that has occurred as a step that you record, as opposed to something that can be interpreted differently by different people. So, for example, instead you could say, rename that stage to interview booked. So if the candidate has booked an interview, found a time for an interview with you, then that's kind of a much better indicator of the fact that they're interested in the role than that they just replied to an email. Another example is, what does each disqualify reason mean? I mean, the most probably vague one I've heard of is, culture fit. So they're not, a fit for us because of something culture related, but no one is able to say exactly what that means. So you should avoid using such reasons and really try to say, okay, is it that they lack certain hard skills? Is it that they lack soft skills? Is it something else? And use these skills where it's very easy to sort of assess whether they're a fit or not according to that criteria. And finally, is the data that you're collecting using whatever tool that you're collecting something that can actually access? So just because you can record the data in a certain ATS, that does not actually mean that you'll be able to get the data out. So check that in advance if that is data that you want to be sort of analyzing later. And like as a workaround, you may, for example, record certain things manually in a spreadsheet if it turns out that you cannot get that data out of your ATS. All right, but the key data in general is the following. It's candidates and their metadata. It's the positions and with the different position stages. Then an important thing that I think a lot of people miss out on is placements. So placement is the thing that links the candidate to a position. They're called different things in different systems, but that's what we call them. So I use that word. But this is very important that a candidate is an entity that's kind of unique. So there are some ATSs I've come across where, for example, the candidate profile is duplicated for every placement. So for every position you consider a candidate from, their information is copied over and they're tracked as like a completely separate entity. You can edit their profile in the context of that position and so on. And that is very bad because you're no longer tracking, storing the data in a so-called normalized manner, but rather the data is denormalized and you will not be able to really make any sort of analysis based on it because some information will be missing and will be difficult to reconstruct. And then last but not least are events associated with the above. So an event is something like candidate moved from one stage to another, candidate was disqualified, position was open, and so on. And this is the thing to watch out for. In a way, like you can build any sort of reporting you want on top of these events. And even though the events may be recorded somewhere in the ATS, very many ATSs do not allow you to actually export the event data, or if they do allow it, then you need to be on a very expensive plan to do it. And that's something that you should be aware of. Okay, so let's look at the tools. The most basic tool, as I mentioned earlier, is a spreadsheet, and that gets you surprisingly far. Then you have, ATSs, but also other SaaS solutions. So, for example, for candidate experience surveys, we use a completely separate solution initially called Delighted, and that works really well for us. And then finally, and very few companies end up at this stage. I think this only occurs once you have more than hundreds of employees and you have like tens, if not hundreds of open positions, is like a separate data warehouse. So kind of a master database where you collect all the data related to recruiting, maybe even you pull in data from your HRM system and your marketing systems and so on. And then that allows for you to analyze things in one place. But these kind of like projects cost on order of 100,000 and up, and typically require like in-house developers to maintain these things. So they're quite rare, but just so you're aware that typically as your company grows, this is how things will evolve. And even if you have a data warehouse or you have an ATS with good reporting functionality, you should not sort of look down on spreadsheets. Again, even at ToughBite, we use spreadsheets to track certain things just because it is easier, it's more flexible. And if the amount of data being entered isn't huge, then it works actually better than some sort of a highly customized solution. Finally, let's talk about analysis. Now, some general advice here, but I think once you have access to the data, it's very tempting to sort of start looking at everything possible and tracking far too many things. My advice would be to identify the key metrics, ideally only one. In the startup world, it's called the North Star metric. For example, for us at ToughBite, it's the number of active positions we're working on. But if you're an in-house recruiter, it might be, say, the time to fill that I mentioned earlier, or the candidate satisfaction or something like that, and track only that one metric or one to three metrics. And then these are things that you should be checking regularly, right? Because any change in that number, well, first of all, you should be looking to increase that number. That's one reason to track it. But then if that number starts decreasing, then alarm bells should start ringing and you should start investigating as to what's wrong. In addition to these kind of ongoing monitoring, you'll also want to run ad hoc queries. So you might sort of have a feeling that there's something wrong with your processes. And if you've been good about collecting data, you should have the data needed to run ad hoc queries to confirm some theories that you have. Like maybe the reason that this particular recruitment is taking so long is because some hiring manager is very slow at scheduling interviews, for example. The next thing is, how you should sort of represent the data. It's tempting to look at numbers, and if it's only one number you're looking at, that's fine. But typically, you'll be looking at, like, as part of a single report, even if it's like the North Star metric, you'll be looking at a number of numbers at the same time. You'll be looking at historical data as well. So my advice would be to try and visualize that data so that it's easier to interpret. Now, once you've identified some sort of an issue, then you can start drilling down, potentially start collecting other metrics, generating other reports, and so on. But don't start drilling down prematurely. Try and look at the bigger picture first. And finally, once you've identified the cause or a potential area for improvement, then the point is not to just look at the data and do nothing with it, but it's important to actually introduce some changes, but do it in a kind of a scientific manner. So to frame that change as an experiment where you sort of expect that after doing certain things, something will change for the better, and you can actually specify the amount by which it will change in advance, sort of set some sort of a bar criteria for yourself. And then, keep recording the data and check back on it, say a month later or a week later, whatever the time period may be, to confirm that the changes you introduced really did have the desired effect. If you cannot sort of confirm with data that, in effect, did take place, then usually it's better to roll back those changes because, any change may have some inadvertent side effects that you haven't sort of taken into account. So it's no point changing things just for the sake of it. It's important to change things so that you're actually improving your processes the whole time. All right, thank you very much. We're a little bit over time, but more or less on track. The announcement that I wanted to make is that we at ToughBite are actually releasing an open source applicant tracking system based on the recruitment platform that we've been building and using for the past 3 or 4 years. And analytics will play like a key role in that ATS. And we really need your input to prioritize the features that we need to build and understand really what problems this ATS should be solving. So if we're already connected, I would appreciate if you'd shoot me a message on LinkedIn and interested in helping out and having a quick chat about the problems you're facing, to shoot me a message. We could schedule a quick call, like a one-on-one session, where I'll ask you a few questions about the problems you're having with your ATS. And in return, I'll be happy to provide some further sort of one-on-one guidance and advice on your recruitment analytics strategy. And if we're not connected, please do connect by scanning this QR code or following the link. And I would love to stay in touch with you. And if you're in Helsinki, buy you lunch or coffee sometime, especially if you're in the Maria 01 area where we're based.